Customers treated Amanda like she didn't matter. They used cruel words and actions to embarrass her just for fun. The whole cafe stayed silent, too afraid to speak up because these people were rich and powerful. But one morning, something surprising happened. Vin Diesel, the quiet owner of the cafe, returned after months away filming movies. He walked in and saw Amanda being treated terribly with his own eyes. He didn't yell or fight, he simply stood his ground, spoke firmly, and handled the situation with calm strength and respect. That morning in Manhattan was cold, with a sharp November breeze that snuck under scarves and chilled people to the bone. Outside, the city moved fast, people rushing, coffee cups clinking, but inside the fancy cafe on 7th Avenue, things were smooth and polished. The lights were warm, jazz played softly, and the smell of fresh almond croissants filled the air. It wasn't just a coffee shop, it felt like a stage where every customer thought they were the star. Behind the counter stood Amanda Lewis, 22 years old. She was quiet, focused, and worked with the grace of someone who knew the job inside and out. Her black apron was neat, her second-hand shoes spotless. She smiled when needed, but not from joy, it was the kind of smile trained by experience. For 7 months, she'd taken the subway from the Bronx early every morning. She arrived before sunrise to clean and prepare the cafe before anyone else showed up. She didn't complain, she couldn't. Her mother always told her, keep your head down, and the storm will pass. But sometimes, storms don't pass. Sometimes, they stay. The trouble started the same way it always did. A group of 4 rich young people walked in around 10:15 a.m., 2 men and 2 women, all under 25. Their clothes were expensive, their laughter loud. They were the children of powerful people, judges, tech billionaires, media bosses. They didn't need to earn respect, they were born with it. The leader was a tall guy named Hunter. He wore a Yale Law hoodie and acted like no one had ever told him no. He walked up to Amanda, wearing sunglasses and chewing gum, and leaned in too close. "Yo, mocha girl," he said, tapping his shiny credit card on the counter. 3 matchas, 1 soy macchiato, and maybe throw in that tired smile too, huh? The others laughed, Cameron, Lexi, and Belle. One of the girls mocked Amanda's accent. Another pretended to take her photo, whispering, "We should post this, #CafeGhettoChic." Amanda didn't react. She typed in the order, nodded, and got to work. Her jaw hurt from how tight she held it, but she didn't let it show. She made the drinks and delivered them without looking at anyone. It got worse. They came in every day, sometimes twice. On Thursday, Cameron spilled his cappuccino and told Amanda to get on her knees to clean it. "Come on," he laughed. "You're already closer to the ground anyway, sweetheart." The cafe went silent. No one, customers or staff, said a word. Not even the manager, who stood nearby pretending to check stock. Amanda knelt and cleaned the floor, feeling every stare on her back. She heard a phone recording and someone whisper, "This'll go viral." She wanted to scream. But instead, she forced a small, fake smile and went back to work. By Friday, she couldn't eat breakfast. Her stomach was always in knots. Her commute felt longer, and her shifts dragged. But she still showed up. She still smiled. She still endured. Amanda had held on, until that morning. She was refilling napkins near the front door when Lexi reached over the counter and accidentally knocked over a full cup of espresso. It spilled all over Amanda's shirt and apron. The group burst out laughing. "Oops," Lexi said, smirking. "I thought brown on brown wouldn't show." The cafe went quiet. People whispered, but no one laughed, and no one stood up for Amanda. She stood still, soaked and humiliated, her fists clenched and her breathing shallow. Without saying a word, she turned and walked to the back. Her body moved on autopilot, through the kitchen, past the storage shelves, and into the staff sink room. She closed the door and leaned against it, her chest rising and falling with emotion she couldn't name, part anger, part sadness. She turned on the tap and splashed cold water on her face again and again, trying to wash away what had just happened, the stain, the shame. But some stains don't come out. Some you can't even see. Her thoughts drifted, not far, just back in time. Back to Brooklyn High School. Back to hallways that smelled like cleaning chemicals and fear. Back to when she was Maya Johnson, 16, quiet, and always trying to stay unnoticed. She had hoped staying silent would keep her safe. But silence made her a target. Ashley Mitchell had made sure of that. Blonde, rich, and mean like broken glass, Ashley picked on Maya just for fun. First the small teasing, then the cruel comments, then the bruises, not always physical, but just as painful. Maya had been tripped in front of the whole cafeteria. Videos of her went around. Ashley laughed. Maya didn't fight back. Not then. But what no one knew was that Maya's father owned a boxing gym in Chicago. She grew up learning how to handle pain, how to stay calm, how to stand strong. She didn't fight out of anger, she fought because sometimes dignity demands it. And one day, when they went too far, she stood up for herself. Back in the café, Maya, looked up from the sink. Water ran down her cheeks like tears. That old version of herself wasn't gone. She was still there, under the uniform and the fear. Her hand gripped the towel tighter. Then, she heard footsteps. Slow. Strong. Confident. These weren't the light, careless steps of spoiled boys. These steps had purpose. She opened the door just a little and looked out. Standing in the middle of the cafe was Vin Diesel. The morning sun lit him up from behind. No big entrance. No words. Just presence. Calm. Solid. Watching. He didn't come in to order coffee. He came to change everything. Vin Diesel didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His presence alone changed the room. Conversation stopped. Forks froze mid-air. People slowly lowered their phones, feeling guilty. His eyes moved across the cafe, not with surprise, but like a man who already knew exactly what had been happening. Vin walked into the cafe, eyes scanning the room. Then he saw her, Amanda, standing in the kitchen doorway, her apron hem still wet. Her cheeks were flushed, but not from heat. It was humiliation. She briefly met his gaze, and he saw that she wasn't being looked at the way most people saw her, like background noise, like a joke. He wasn't looking past her, and he wasn't looking down on her. He was looking at her as if she mattered. He turned his body toward the group in the corner by the window, the ones who treated her like an afterthought. Hunter was sprawled in his chair, legs wide, arrogance practically oozing from him. He noticed the shift in Vin's stance. Raising an eyebrow, Hunter leaned over and whispered to Cameron, who let out a chuckle. Brielle checked the angle of her phone's camera, clearly thinking this could be fodder for their private group chat, one of many entitled, Peasant Problems. Lexi rolled her eyes, far more interested in her own reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser than anything else. Vin took a step forward, his voice calm but deep, like someone who had spent years reading people without ever being surprised. "You come here often?" he asked, his words deliberate. Hunter blinked, a touch of caution creeping into his voice. Yeah, he answered slowly. "Why?" Vin nodded, like something was clicking into place. "You've had plenty of chances to act better." There was no anger in his words, just quiet conviction. Hunter scoffed, leaning back in his chair in an attempt to regain control. "We were just messing around, man. It's not that deep." Vin tilted his head, his gaze sharp. "No. You weren't just messing around. You were degrading a woman who came here to do her job. You did it loudly enough for everyone to hear, so now, you're going to listen just as loudly." The cafe fell silent. The hiss of the espresso machine was the only sound that filled the air. Customers sipped their drinks, frozen, unsure whether to breathe or to move. The baristas looked between the confrontation and the door, unsure whether to intervene or fade into the background. One of the cooks peeked through the swinging kitchen door, holding a spatula like it might offer some protection. Lexi crossed her arms and muttered, "What is this, a lecture?" Cameron tried to lighten the mood. "Oh, come on, Vin, you're really pulling the whole Fast and Furious thing here, huh? This is supposed to be sensitive and serious." Vin's gaze never wavered. No smile. No joke. "You think you can hide behind your dad's money? You think the world owes you something because you exist?" "I built this place," he said, his voice unwavering. "I designed every inch of it, not for entitled kids like you to turn it into a playground, but for people like her, to feel safe, to feel human, to feel seen." He pointed toward Amana, still standing in the kitchen doorway, still stunned. "And you've made her invisible. That ends now." Hunter's mask cracked. He tried to hold on to his charm, but it faltered. "Do you know who my dad is?" His voice was louder now, desperate, hoping his name would shield him. Vin took a slow step closer, his arms still relaxed. His voice was calm, but it hit like a freight train. "Do you know who you are without him?" The words hung in the air, slicing through the tension. For the first time, Hunter's group looked uncertain. Lexi shifted uncomfortably. Cameron stared at his shoes. Brielle lowered her phone. Vin looked at the rest of the café. "I've seen this before. Different places, different faces, same story. Rich kids come in, throw their weight around, and everyone else gets quiet because no one wants to mess with the system." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was steel. "But this? This isn't the system. This is a café. And here, we treat people like people. Or we don't treat them at all." Someone in the back clapped, then another joined, until it was a steady rhythm. A woman in a gray pantsuit stood, murmuring her approval, arms crossed. A young man at the bar gave Amana a small, encouraging nod. Even the general manager, usually reserved, stepped forward, his voice slightly unsteady. "Mr. Diesel, we've let this go on for too long. I'm sorry." Vin said nothing. He only turned back to the group still seated by the window. "Finish your drinks. But just so you know," he said evenly, "this is your last round here. This café doesn't serve entitlement." The room was quiet. But something had shifted. That it doesn't serve cruelty, and we definitely don't serve people who think power means permission. Hunter opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out. He looked around, realizing no one was going to defend him, and stood up with a scoff. "Whatever," he mumbled, "this place was overrated anyway." Lexi followed, her heels clicking on the floor with less confidence than before. Cameron threw a crumpled napkin on the table, and Brielle grabbed her phone without looking anyone in the eye. They all left in silence, the door closing behind them. Vin turned back toward Amana, who hadn't moved. Her eyes were shiny, but she held them steady. He walked toward her slowly and stopped a few feet away. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once and whispered, "I think so." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a brand new name tag with gold trim that said Amana L Assistant Floor Lead. He placed it in her hand. "Been meaning to give you this," he said, "but I figured today was the right time." Her fingers closed around it as if it were something holy. "Thank you," she said, but it sounded more like, "I'm still here." Vin turned back to the café. "We'll be closed for an hour," he announced, "free drinks for anyone who came to witness something better than silence." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, light and relieved, as customers started talking again and baristas returned to their rhythm. Amana stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching the man who had just shifted the whole room with nothing but the truth. She didn't know where the courage came from, but she stepped out and walked back behind the bar. One of the baristas handed her a clean towel, and another patted her on the shoulder. An elderly woman who always ordered a cappuccino with almond milk whispered, "You deserve better than what they gave you." Amanda smiled, and this time it wasn't forced. It was small, real, coming from the part of her that had waited so long to be seen. In the corner, Vin poured himself a cup of black coffee, leaned against the counter, and watched her work. Not because he was checking, but because he was proud that she hadn't broken, proud that she had stayed, and maybe proud that this time someone didn't stay quiet. The afternoon light shifted across the floor of Aura Café, stretching into soft amber streaks through the windows as if the city itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The mood had changed. The air, once heavy with discomfort and unsaid things, now carried a strange, unfamiliar stillness, a quiet not of silence, but of awareness. People spoke more softly, they looked each other in the eye, and they smiled, not because they had to, but because something in the room reminded them what decency looked like. Amanda moved through the cafe with a new kind of stillness, not the timid quiet of someone hoping not to be noticed, but the calm steadiness of a woman who had reclaimed her space. She didn't flinch when people looked at her now. She met their gaze, head high, shoulders back. A few customers greeted her by name. One older man, a regular in a gray blazer and thick glasses, placed his hand gently on the counter and said, "I saw and I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." She nodded, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile of victory, but one from surviving something that tried to take away her name and dignity and failed. Vin Diesel remained in the background, quietly sipping his coffee, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, observing the ripple effect of what had just happened. He wasn't there to bask in attention. He wasn't there to be thanked. He was there because it needed to be done, and no one else had done it. That, to him, was reason enough. A manager approached him with a clipboard in hand, stammering apologies about having let things slide and how they didn't want to lose big clientele. But Vin held up his hand and said, "Stop. You're not here to protect the comfort of abusers. You're here to protect the soul of this place." He pointed toward Amanda, who was now pouring a cappuccino with steady hands. That's what this cafe was built for, people who show up every day and still choose kindness. Outside, the city continued as usual, with horns blaring and people walking quickly, but inside Aura, time felt slower, more deliberate, almost sacred. An hour passed, then another, and when the cafe reopened, something unspoken had changed. Amanda took her break around 4 p.m., slipping into the employee lounge in the back, the same room where earlier that morning she had held back tears. Now, she sat at a small table by the vending machine, her hands wrapped around a warm paper cup of chamomile tea. It was grounding. She didn't check her phone or scroll through social media to see if the footage had gone viral, though she knew it probably had. She didn't need to relive it, she was already living something better. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The door opened slowly, and Vin stepped in holding an envelope. He walked over, sat across from her, and placed the envelope on the table. He tapped it once with his finger and said, "This is yours." Amanda looked at it, hesitant. "What is it?" she asked. He shrugged. "Something you've earned. Maybe something you can use to build what comes next." Amanda opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a check, a number that made her breath catch. It was enough to cover the rest of her student loans, enough to start something, whatever she wanted. She blinked, stunned. "Why?" she whispered. Vin leaned back, rubbing his hands together as if thinking through something bigger than words. "Because you reminded me why I opened this place in the first place, not for image, not for investors, but for people like you who wake up early, stay late, and still smile at strangers who treat them like ghosts. You reminded me what strength really looks like." Amanda stared at the check again, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her apron, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it meant. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick. Vin nodded once. "Don't thank me. Just promise me one thing," he said. She met his gaze. "When someone else like you walks into a room full of people who want her to shrink, don't let her. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. I promise. They sat for a moment longer, no rush, no need for more words. When Vin stood to leave, she followed him to the back door. He paused, looking out toward the street where the sun dipped low behind tall glass towers. You know, he said, smiling faintly, in all the movies I've done, there's always a final scene where the hero walks away like nothing happened. But this, he gestured back to the café, feels real. Amanda smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. That's because it is. Vin gave her a nod that said everything he didn't say out loud, then walked out into the New York dusk, blending into the golden shadows of the city he knew so well. Inside, Amanda returned to the counter. There were drinks to make, tables to clean, and new faces to greet, but now, there was something different in the way people looked at her, not as a server or background player, but as someone who had stood up in a moment when the world told her to stay small, and in doing so, had changed the shape of the room around her. Days passed, and the video went viral. Headlines used words like powerful and long overdue. Comments flooded in, praising her composure, her grace. The cafe saw an influx of visitors, not because of the coffee, but because people wanted to sit in the place where someone had finally said, enough. Journalists called, podcast hosts requested interviews, and one network even offered to fly her to LA, but Amanda declined most of it. She didn't want to become a symbol. She just wanted to keep moving forward, quietly and steadily, just like always. On a cool Saturday morning, 2 weeks later, she walked into the cafe before sunrise. She brewed the first pot of dark roast, set out the pastries, and turned on the lights. The place smelled like cinnamon and calm. The new assistant manager, Marcus, now promoted, greeted her with a grin and a fresh bouquet of daisies for the counter. Customers trickled in, some familiar, some new. One woman with a toddler ordered a hot chocolate and softly said, "Thank you for reminding my daughter what strength looks like." That afternoon, Amanda paused behind the register, watching the cafe in motion. She thought about the girl she had been, the one who stayed quiet in the face of cruelty and walked home each night with her dignity held together by threads. That girl still existed inside her, but now she had company, the woman who had found her voice in the middle of a storm and used it, not to scream, but to stand above it. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the gold edge of her name tag like a promise, Amanda L., assistant floor lead. She took a breath, picked up a tray, and stepped forward, not because she had to, but because now she could.